can save this in case anyone wants to go back, or if anyone who's not able to make this webinar can then reference it. We also are planning on holding a second webinar later in October for any follow-up questions or any other clarifications. So with that, I'll go ahead and I think I'll kick it over to Eric. And Eric, if you want to go ahead and start and provide any other context you might want.
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. Sorry, just give me a second here to share my screen. Having a challenge finding it. There it is. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, great. Okay, thank you all for being here today. Eric Feely, as Rachel said, Air Quality Planner in the Transportation Strategy section. And as Rachel said, we're happy to take your questions throughout the presentation. Just to point out, though, it's a relatively short 8-slide, 15-minute presentation, so it should be fairly brief. The main focus of today's discussion will be your questions and making sure you're clear on what we're planning. It would help us if you put your questions in the chat for us to track, but you can also feel free to raise your hand, and Garrick will help me make sure that we're able to get to your questions. So let's see if okay, all right. So first off, just a bit of an overview of what we're planning to talk to you about today. We're going to sort of cut to the chase right off the bat, give you a summary of our planned action on these omnibus rules, but then we're going to go back and talk about some background, some detail about the new diesel engine requirements, applicability, talk a little bit about legacy engines that are described in the rules. We'll talk about the CARB proposed rule updates, and then we'll go into next steps. There'll be a little bit of repetition, but hopefully that'll be enough to kind of drive the points home. And then we'll briefly highlight what we're doing to help fleets transition to a zero emission future and cleaner emitting future. And then we'll take your questions. All right, so high level here, but really just wanted to get you the main point of this is that DEQ is planning to propose temporary rules at our November Environmental Quality Commission meeting to postpone implementation of the low NOx omnibus rules for 1 year. So instead of going into effect with engine model year 2024, they will go into effect with engine model year 2025. Before I go into the rationale for this action, I just wanted to define some engine categories at the outset. First off, what are compliant engines? Compliant engines are those that are CARB certified under the omnibus rules to emit at least 75% lower oxides of nitrogen and 50% lower particulate matter. Legacy engines are engines that meet the 2023 emission standards, that's today's standards, that can be sold in 2024 and 2025, according to current rules. And those are subject to certain restrictions, such as caps on the sales volume of those engines and the requirement to offset any excess emissions associated with those engines. A third category of engines are exempt engines, which would include engines like transit bus diesel engines and engines in emergency vehicles, but also high horsepower engines, which are subject to certain volume restrictions that are described in the rules. So the rationale behind this proposed action that we're planning on, first off, timing. CARB does not plan to have final amendments adopted until just before the end of the year. And that really doesn't give Oregon enough time to propose the adoption of those final amendments into our rules prior to the beginning of the engine model year. In most cases, that's January 2nd of 24. Secondly, there's a lack of detailed criteria for legacy engine offset projects. So these projects are one way that manufacturers can offset any excess emissions that are associated with the sale of these legacy engines. Without any details of approval criteria or how emissions reductions would be calculated, manufacturers who don't expect to have the available credits to counter their deficits are just not clear about what their responsibilities are when carrying out those offset projects. Third, uncertainty over when omnibus compliant engines will be available and on the market in 2024. So if a manufacturer isn't able to accurately predict when an engine will be available for sale, it becomes challenging to estimate how many legacy engines that they can sell in that year. Because of that problem, some engine manufacturers have decided or said they're going to temporarily not sell legacy engines in 2024, and that supply restriction would create significant problems for fleets that are in need of new vehicles. And finally, to ease ongoing restrictions on the truck supply, we've had a number of conversations with fleet managers that indicate that truck supply constraints have been severe over the last 18 months. And the implementation of the omnibus rules in 24 would likely prevent many fleets from making the purchases that they need to make. So DEQ will propose a permanent rule to adopt the final CARB amendments in 2024 to ensure that our rules align with the CARB rules and are identical and prevent any gaps in compliance when our rules go into effect in 2025. And our plan is intended to create a smooth transition for engine manufacturers.
Eric, I would like to chime in with a quick question if now is an okay time.
Go for it.
Will essential service providers be added to the exempt list? We are a garbage and recycling collection provider.
Well, let's talk about that a little later, but it's a good question. So I'm bookmarking that for toward the end of the presentation here, but thanks for the question. All right, so just stepping backward. So I already told you all what we're planning on doing. So hopefully that's clear, but if not, we'll revisit it. But let's talk a little bit about background. So first of all, what are the clean truck rules? Just to remind everybody, take a step back. These are rules that were adopted in 2021, and they were focused on two California rules. The first of those was about clearly outlining a path to zero tailpipe emissions for future medium and heavy duty trucks in Oregon. And that's similar to work that Oregon has already done in the light duty market. That rule is called the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule. The second rule was designed to make sure that all conventionally fueled new trucks sold into Oregon were as clean as possible. And those rules, which we are focused on here today, are the heavy duty low NOx omnibus rules. I'll refer to them today as simply omnibus rules. So what has happened since Oregon adopted these rules? So what you see here on the slide is a bit of a timeline. So we adopted or the EQC, I should say, adopted in November of 2021. In December of 2022, US EPA adopted new national truck standards that will go into effect in 2027. And in July of this year, just a couple months ago, CARB and engine manufacturers announced the Clean Truck Partnership. A month after that, in August, CARB announced low NOx omnibus amendments that we'll talk a little bit about in a moment. And CARB is expected to adopt those final amendments just a few days really before the end of the year. So let's get into a little more detail about what the new diesel engine requirements are under the omnibus rules. So first of all, they're just simply at a high level, lower emission of oxides of nitrogen or NOx and lower emissions of particulate matter. These are engine standards designed to decrease emissions out of the tailpipe. The first phase was scheduled to start with engine model year 24. You can see here on the slide, DEQ is going to propose a temporary rule that would delay implementation until engine model year 2025. The second phase is scheduled to start with engine model year 2027. And that clean truck partnership that I referenced in the previous slide is important to this conversation, because in that partnership, there was agreement between CARB and engine manufacturers to align with EPA for 2027. So that means we'll have one national standard in 2027, which is a good outcome. So who do these rules apply to? I know there's been some confusion around this question. So the rules apply to manufacturers that offer new medium and heavy duty trucks and engines for sale in Oregon. They don't apply to fleets, and there's no specific fleet purchasing requirements. Now, we are aware, of course, most of you are aware, I imagine, of California passing the Advanced Clean Fleets Rule. Oregon has no intention of adopting those requirements at this time. And if we do, we would go through our typical rulemaking process and solicit input and feedback from stakeholders, community members, et cetera. So I want to talk a little bit about the California proposed amendments. This will be the primary focus of our permanent rulemaking that I talked about earlier, that we plan to bring before the Environmental Quality Commission in the late spring, early summer of next year. And again, just as a reminder, Oregon DEQ is planning to temporarily postpone the implementation of our currently adopted rules from 24 to 25. But as I mentioned in an earlier slide, in July of this year, CARB and truck and engine manufacturers announced a partnership to meet clean air goals. The terms of that agreement included two high-level goals. First, that CARB will align with the US EPA's 2027 national emission regulations, as I mentioned. And second, that CARB did commit to amending the 2024 omnibus regulations as needed while maintaining emission targets. And then in August, CARB announced proposed modification to the omnibus rules. And some of those changes and flexibilities, I'll just kind of go through high level here. First off, the idea was that any amendments would be emissions neutral, so that there wouldn't be, so added flexibilities would need to be, could not add to emissions that were already modeled as part of that rulemaking. Second, legacy engine offsets remain in place, and these offset projects, I think I mentioned in the first few slides, are key for the sale of legacy engines to make sure that we're not having any excess emissions, that any excess emissions associated with those legacy engines would be offset through either the credit purchasing process or offset projects. The third flexibility that CARB is building into their proposal, having the ability to certify and sell legacy engines prior to certifying an omnibus compliant engine family. This is key for engine manufacturers that may not be bringing in a compliant engine until later on in 2024, so that they could sell the legacy engines earlier on in the year. And finally here, for the ability for engine manufacturers to start any proposed and approved offset projects as early as 2024, which was not originally stated in the rules. I think that it was really more of a backloaded proposal. These offset projects were intended to be backloaded initially, and so they're looking at the ability to adopt projects early in 24 rather than 25 or 26. So getting to the end here, and we'll move on to your questions here very quickly. DEQ has informally notified some engine manufacturers about this change, and we will formally notify all manufacturers of our intentions so that they can plan for the 2024 model year. DEQ will also post this information on our website, so that's widely available. We plan to bring a temporary rule before the Environmental Quality Commission that delays implementation of the low NOx omnibus rules for 1 model year, as I said. If the EQC adopts the temporary rule, the low NOx omnibus rules would go into effect with engine model year 2025. DEQ will continue to work with CARB and engine manufacturers to create any needed additional flexibilities in the final CARB amendments. Some of you may be aware that CARB is holding a public hearing on those amendments October 20th. We anticipate there being additional 15-day changes as part of their rulemaking process. So, we're continuing to engage CARB in that process, making sure that manufacturers in Oregon, have the flexibilities that they need, again, being emissions neutral. DEQ also plans to bring a permanent rule before the Environmental Quality Commission that makes the temporary rule permanent and adopts the final low NOx omnibus amendments, which we expect to see from CARB by the end of this year. And here's where I'm going to get to Garrick. Thank you for that question earlier. If outstanding issues remain related to implementation in 2025, those issues can be brought up during that permanent rulemaking process, through the spring of 24. So if there are sectors that believe that they need to be exempted from the rules for whatever reason, I think that that's the appropriate time to bring those points to us in that permanent rulemaking. Again, the temporary rulemaking is a very streamlined, simple thing where we're just, going forward with a year-long delay, and we're not really addressing any of the rule content. But this permanent rulemaking process would be the right time to bring up any additional exemptions that you're looking for. DEQ will also be tracking any amendments to the advanced clean trucks rule, which I mentioned that earlier. That's that zero tailpipe emission rule, and considering adoption of those amendments to the rules as needed to remain identical to California. I also, again, want to remind folks that we're not planning on adopting California's advanced clean fleets regulation at this time. Again, I know there's been some confusion over that. And those are purchasing requirements for large fleets and government entities. If we do decide to move forward in that direction, we would carry out public outreach and a comment process to solicit feedback on the rule. I've got just one more slide here, switching gears just a little bit to talk about the transition support that DEQ has been providing and or will be providing in the future. So first off, our diesel emission mitigation grants. Those grants go through 2027 and are approximately $8 million per year. Notice is put out each year, solicitation for grant projects. We also have the federal funds from the DERA program, the Diesel Emission Reduction Act program. Those are ongoing each year at about 1.2 million. We also have additional federal funds through federal highways. That's the congestion mitigation air quality grants, about $250,000 per year. There are additional incentives under our Clean Fuels program, which is a credit market associated with cleaner fuels and credit generation from bringing cleaner fuels to the market. We have a couple of new grant programs. Just earlier this year, we announced awardees for our Oregon Zero Emission infrastructure grants. As I say, 13.3 million, which is some good work. It is a one-time grant opportunity. We're hoping at some point in the future to have more funds for that work, but they were very popular, and we're happy to see how those projects pan out. In the future, we have medium-duty vocational vehicle incentives that came about from the last legislative session through House Bill 2714. And we anticipate standing up that program with a rulemaking later in 24. So, and Garrick is really our expert on all of those transition projects. And so if there are questions about that, I'm sure Garrick will be happy to answer those. But I am done, really, and it's time for questions if you all have any.
We do, Eric. Thank you. We've got a robust conversation already underway in the chat, and I will start at the top. Even though this first question here, I think you've already responded to a little bit. Will Oregon farm, quote unquote, F-plated trucks be exempt for any period of time once things go into effect? I think you already sort of talked about that exemption process, but maybe there's some more detail there.
Right. If currently there's no exemption for those trucks specifically, and we're not planning on exempting any additional sectors. But if there are concerns related to exemptions or concerns about supply, I think we would be interested in hearing those concerns as part of our permanent rulemaking in 2024. That having information is important to us when we make rulemaking. So yes, please bring any information about restrictions in supply for new trucks in that sector. And that really goes for any sector that's concerned about that.
Great. I'm just going to keep going because folks are still adding questions, and we've got a long list here. Will the enforcement of the new rules be based on when the engine was manufactured, engine model year, or on the date of initial registration of the completed vehicle? We are a bodybuilder with a current component lead times, and we have projects that are taking multiple months to complete. Is that question clear?
Yeah, I'm trying to read it too, because I think I need to actually read the question here. So will the enforcement of the new rules be based on when the engine was manufactured? Yeah, it is based on when the engine is manufactured and not on date of registration. So I know that question has come up about, hey, can we sell engines in this case, we'll be talking 2025, right? Because we're delaying the rules a year. But if you, let's say we're coming close to 2025 and you're you've got a 2024 engine in a vehicle that's been sold in 2025, that sort of selling through that inventory is totally fine and appropriate. These rules are about engines that are manufactured for sale in that given model year, so they would really apply to manufacturers and really apply to the engines produced in 25. Not anything that was sort of still sitting there on the lot as inventory.
Got it. So I think that answers this next question, but I'll ask it anyway. You'll postpone CARB omnibus adoption until 2025. The question: will you accept diesel engines certified to 2024 CARB, or will you require a model year 24 diesel to be EPA certified?
That's a good question. I think we would definitely accept diesel engines certified to 24 CARB, because that would mean that they would be 75% lower emitting on NOx and 50% lower emitting on particulate matter. So yes, we would accept those for sale, and we would gladly accept those. But we will also accept federally certified engines in 24.
Great.
So yeah, I mean, I think the question is, what framework are we under in 24? Are we under the CARB rules, or are we under the federal rules? And right now in 23, we're under the federal rules. Because of this delayed implementation, we would be under the federal rules for 2024.
Great answer, very clear. Would a dealer in Oregon be able to sell non-CARB omnibus trucks to a customer in Idaho who is plating and operating in Idaho?
So I guess I'd like to know more information. Are you talking about in 25, or are you talking about in 24? So it seems to me that a non-CARB omnibus trucks to customers in Idaho. Yes, I mean, because there's no, if you're selling a federal engine, you could sell it to somebody in Idaho. That's not a problem. I don't really see the issue there. But if you're talking about in 25, you would not be able to, because at that point, well, it would depend a little bit. I'm sorry for the confusion. It would depend on whether you were still under the legacy engine provisions. If you had, when you say non-CARB, you could mean in this question non-certified legacy engine. And if you were selling a legacy engine from Oregon to a customer in Idaho, it would just have to be under those legacy engine provisions. And so it would, you're subject to those restrictions. And I should say the engine manufacturer is subject to those restrictions. So I think the engine manufacturer in that case would look at where you were selling to finally. So, you're selling out of Oregon, you're a dealer in Oregon selling to Idaho. I expect that the engine manufacturer in their tracking process would say that engine's destination is to Idaho. So I guess I'm kind of backtracking a bit. You probably would be able to sell that because the manufacturer would not track that as an Oregon engine. They would track it as an Idaho engine, even though it was sold in Oregon. It's kind of confusing, I know. My apologies. But I think you would be able to sell into Idaho based on my understanding of the way engine manufacturers are tracking. So they're tracking really where that engine is being sold into. And I think that's distinct from where the engine is coming from in terms of the dealer. So they're looking at, okay, the engine is landing in Idaho, therefore that's an Idaho engine, therefore it's not subject to the omnibus rules.
Yeah, I think the key point there might be the point of regulation is between the engine manufacturer and import to the state of Oregon. It doesn't apply for the dealer, but we may need to dig into that more. So someone's asking a question: what defines a fleet from Oregon's perspective?
What defines a fleet? Wow, that's a fleet is, typically your PepsiCo, fleet, your Coca-Cola, your beverage fleet, your refuse fleets. I don't know. That's a tricky question for me. I'd have to. That's kind of an existential question. It is essentially, a business operating in Oregon that has a number of trucks, medium and heavy duty trucks, that they own and operate in Oregon, and they're registered in Oregon. So I don't know if that helps. I guess.
So Eric, I don't know if this is like, maybe it's supposed to be in reference to like advanced clean fleets where there are certain fleet size requirements. Because Oregon has not adopted advanced clean fleets, there are no fleet, I guess you could say, definitions. So you could be a fleet of 1 or a fleet of 5 or a fleet of 50 right now. So I don't know if that helps answer the question.
Thank you for that, Rachel. Appreciate that lifeline.
All right, I'll keep reading through. I see some responses in the chat that are attempting to be helpful, so I appreciate folks sharing your perspective here. And Eric, you've already answered this question, but I'll ask it. What is Oregon considering for advanced clean fleet adoption? The announcement included advanced clean trucks only for 2025. No mention of advanced clean fleets. I think you've already addressed that. No intention at this time. And then there's sort of an immediate follow-on here. If Oregon has no intention to adopt a purchase requirement, then why would ZEV manufacturing and sales requirements remain in effect when there does not appear to be a massive state-led effort to fund the billions in infrastructure and increased truck cost to Oregon businesses? Thank you.
I don't know. Maybe Rachel, I'd ask you for assistance here.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I can understand, I know that California has adopted advanced clean fleets. We are, continuing to evaluate whether or not that's something that we want to pursue here in Oregon. I think, one of the things that we feel is critical is ensuring that there's, adequate incentives to help facilitate the procurement of vehicles and infrastructure for the fleets. And so we are moving in that direction. We do have the OZEF grants, granted that was a, but we are looking to see if we can obtain more funding to support that work. We did just, recently get House Bill 2714 passed that allows us to stand up a medium and heavy duty rebate program. Granted, we only received $3 million for that, but that does allow us to sort of establish the framework for medium and heavy duty incentives, because we know that medium and heavy duty ZEVs are more expensive than your traditional vehicles. And so we want to make sure that we can support that. So part of that too is us looking at other federal funds to help, support or build up, I guess, the bank of revenue to sort of continue that program. So there's a number of things too. So I think in order for us to be successful, we want to make sure that we are able to offer a full suite of options for fleets to make this transition.
Great. I'll keep moving here. With the short time period to react to these new regulations, why would you not just wait for the 2027 national rollout like most other states? This is extremely disruptive to Northwest dealership businesses, and due to limited availability of battery electric vehicles in vocational and other specialized applications, the use of battery electric vehicles is years, if not decades, away from reality.
Sure. I feel like there's maybe a little confusion on this question. So the battery electric vehicles that you're referring to are, I think you're referring to advanced clean trucks, right? Which are the requirements for sales of certain percentages of zero emission vehicles in the state of Oregon. And those percentages depend on the class of vehicle. But then they go up over time, the percentage of the sales requirements, and those are not purchase requirements. So you're referencing disruptions to dealerships. Certainly, we recognize that might be challenging to get those vehicles sold. Certainly understand that, but that's the 2027 date that you're referring to is the omnibus rules and not the advanced clean truck rules. So advanced clean truck rules go into effect with model year 2025. And the omnibus rules are about conventionally fueled vehicles. And those would go into effect with our temporary delay in 2025, not 2024. So it's a little bit of confusion between the 2027 national standards, which I think you're referring to, and these zero emission vehicle sales requirements, which are a slightly different issue. I also would say that the EPA is looking at their phase 3 greenhouse gas rules that would, essentially be like a national advanced clean trucks rule. We don't know what that's going to look like at this point, but they are working through that process. So we'll see whether there's alignment with the California rule in those rules. But I just want to clarify that there's not a requirement here to sell zero emission, or sorry, to purchase zero emission trucks. And I know that that's challenging for dealerships, recognizing that. But as Rachel said, we're looking at whether we would adopt an advanced clean fleets like rule to help out in that situation. So stay tuned. But at this time, we don't have any information to share on that.
Okay, and I'm just going to give voice to some responses that are coming in the chat in real time, not questions, but folks expressing concern that if Oregon doesn't have, the robust incentive funds and advanced clean fleet mandates, then why, roll out these omnibus rules without them? So I just want to share that as it's coming up. I won't read it again later. The next question is somewhat related. How are the OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, expected to meet the advanced clean truck mandate without an advanced clean fleet mandate? I think we've got into that a little bit. I don't know if there's anything more to share there. So the advanced clean, next question then. The advanced clean trucks only applies to the engine original equipment manufacturers, and without advanced clean fleets, there is no pull through for ZEV from customers. The legislation needs to go hand in hand, create a push and pull situation. So this is all sort of one thread. Feel free to respond if you've got something more to share. I'll keep reading these questions. Can you share a permanent rulemaking timeline? We would like to get an idea on when Oregon would finalize things. Rachel, I saw that you provided some written response in the chat on that. If you'd like, I can read that now. Rachel responded in the chat earlier. She said, we would need to have a permanent rule in place by May of 2024. The plan is to begin development of the permanent rule at the end of the year, hold an advisory committee meeting in January of 2024, and hold our public comment process in January and February 2024. Thanks, folks, for bearing with me. I'm going to read to the next question. can you define the verbiage, quote unquote, made available for sale in the rule as it applies to vehicle availability? Can you tell me if the Oregon dealer needs to wholesale purchase vehicles, or can the original equipment manufacturer hold inventory for the dealers, making it available if Oregon buyers want a zero-emission vehicle?
I think I'm going to need to sit on this question for a little bit, and I can't get to you right now, but I will respond to Quinn on this question, and we can do some research. But I appreciate the question.
Yeah, I think we'll have to get back to you on that one.
Great. Thanks for asking. Thanks for answering. Someone is requesting that we please put the website link in the chat so we can access it. I assume that's a link to the rule itself. Okay.
And I can pop that in there.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, an additional question here. Would you consider putting the final slide back onto the screen? Valuable info on it. Oh, I'm not sure which one that is, but just a request to take a look at the, perhaps it's this one. Great. Okay, next question. When do you expect to do the formal notification of the delay to manufacturers?
Good question. We anticipate that'll happen either late today or beginning of next week.
Yeah, right. So we'll be sending out a letter to the manufacturers, just letting everyone know of our intent.
Great. Okay. Someone is asking, will school districts be able to order and take delivery of a diesel school bus in 2024?
That's a good question. That's it. We are delaying the implementation of these omnibus rules, as we've said here a number of times, but none of that, controls supply from school bus, manufacturers and sellers. I mean, I know that there have been constraints that, and I think we referenced this earlier in the presentation, that are even beyond these rules that relate to supply chain problems, et cetera. So we couldn't speak to whether there would be availability of school buses, diesel school buses in 2024. That's a individual manufacturer question or supplier question. But I would say is the rules would not, the omnibus rules would not be the reason why they wouldn't be able to deliver, because again, we would be delaying those until 2025.
Great. Okay, next up, are Oregon fleets allowed to purchase outside of the state of Oregon that don't meet what Oregon dealer requirements?
So that's an interesting question. Again, I'll go back to what I said a little earlier. The manufacturers are looking at where the vehicles and engines are landing as a sort of final destination. So if you went to Idaho and purchased a vehicle and brought it over into Oregon immediately, I think the OEMs are tracking that, and they're looking at where those engines are landing in which state. So I suspect that would be a bit of a challenge. Having said that, there are no licensure or connections to licensing in the state. So these are air quality rules put out by the Environmental Quality Commission, and there's nothing in the Oregon Vehicle Code that would prevent that kind of action. But there's a risk for manufacturers when they're selling those engines, and so I think that tension exists, and I would expect that it would be hard to purchase non-compliant engines in 2025 because the final destination of the product, and usually there's some awareness of where that final destination is.
And Eric, I think this gets back to sort of the original, maybe some initial confusion just about, fleet purchase requirements, and there are none in Oregon. So fleets are able to purchase wherever and they want, whether it's in Oregon or outside of Oregon. So hopefully that kind of gets to the question.
Next question here. So no plans to phase out older engines at this time in Oregon? And I assume that's a question. I provided a link to the House Bill 2007 vehicle phase out requirements in the Portland metropolitan area, Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas County. But I'll leave it at that. Eric, if you had any more substance you wanted to share.
No, yeah, I think that there are phase out requirements that Garrick is linked to, but that is not related to the rules that we're talking about today. That relates to, older 96 and older vehicles. And there's some different phases there, and that's for the Portland metro area counties.
And this next question is actually right in line with the same sort of thread here. Easy to respond, I believe. If I have a diesel truck on order and will receive it in 2024, what is the lifespan that I am allowed to run that vehicle on the road?
That's a challenging question because, I don't know that any of us could speak to the future. So in 20 years, I wouldn't know. I mean, but I mean, as of now, there's no restrictions on the lifespan for those vehicles. But there's nothing that to say that something couldn't happen in 20 years or 30 years that says, you're no longer able to have your 2024 engine. So it's hard for us to speak to for how long you could have that with any certainty. But there's currently no restrictions on a truck that you would order and receive in 2024 in terms of lifespan and ability to keep that truck.
Yeah.
Isn't it, pardon me, but isn't that question aimed at the CARB requirement that the engines be useful for a certain number of miles?
Oh, so if there's a question about useful life, I mean, there's certainly some, language around, requirements for useful life. But in terms of the manufacturer side, how long must an engine last? How, or there's warranty requirements and that kind of thing, durability requirements, right? But in terms of lifespan that you're allowed to have a vehicle on the road, Oregon has no restrictions on the length of time you could keep a truck that you purchase in 24.
Yep. And I think that answer actually speaks to the next question. So there's some conflation of issues here, but I appreciate folks asking. So a truck in the 70s, 80s, or 90s model years with obviously no new style emissions control systems will be illegal to operate in Oregon. When? Question mark. And I think the answer is we don't have regulations that would require you to phase out those engines at this time unless they're registered in the Portland metro area.
Let me just jump in though. I mean, again, yeah, right. So sorry to step on your lines there, Garrick. Right, and Garrick said it. There are some restrictions for vehicles that are 96 and older as of the beginning of this year. And so, and that's that rule that Garrick linked to above is key for you. So if you've got an older truck and you're registered or titled in the Portland metro tri-county area, Clackamas, Multnomah, Washington counties, you should take a look at those rules. You likely would have received something related, something in the mail from ODOT related to this to inform you, because that is part of the vehicle code. And those are Department of Transportation rules. Oregon DEQ doesn't administer those rules. We do offer a compliance pathway for those rules for retrofitting trucks. So if you're a truck that is no longer compliant and looking to get, to register your vehicle and you haven't been able to do that, you can get, if you're able to, you can get your truck retrofitted and get a certificate of compliance from DEQ and provide that certificate to the Department of Transportation and be able to get registered. But that is the compliance pathway that we offer, but we're not the owners of those rules.
So for Chris Burworth, I provided a link in response to your chat, sort of in support of what Eric just shared. Next question, I think we've touched on this, but I'll read it. What is the engine age considered outside of the tolerance associated with this new law?
So we're talking about the omnibus rules. All these rules apply to new engines. So we're not talking about older engines. I know it's a little confusing because we use this term legacy engine. The legacy engine is a term, again, that is designed to help smooth the transition. So there's compliant engines, which are California Omnibus certified, meaning they emit 75% lower NOx, 50% lower particulate matter. And there's allowances to sell legacy engines, meaning engines that meet today's emission standard. But there are certain restrictions on those sales. You can only sell a certain percentage of your total volume as an engine manufacturer as legacy. And if you do sell those engines, you have to offset either through purchase of credits or securing of credits in some way, or through offset projects that would reduce NOx in some other way. So when we're talking about engine age, that's really not part of the discussion. We're talking about new engines being sold. We're not talking about anything related to engines that are already on the road.
And I see a comment here that someone helping respond in real time, but I think it was related to the Idaho question earlier. This comment, the sale goes to state of registration. So it's not a question, it's more just engagement, I think. Next up, you said the spring rulemaking process is when our industry, essential service, garbage, and recycling collection for residential and commercial. How will this affect our ability to provide service if we are not made exempt and are unable to even purchase the needed vehicles, let alone find vehicles that fit the standards?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some assumptions built into that question that there's not going to be any vehicles available. Again, the purpose of the legacy engine provisions that we were talking about and have been talking about is to provide engines if there is no compliant engine available. So the idea here is, let's say I'm an engine manufacturer, I have to manufacture a compliant CARB engine. Once I meet that criteria of manufacturing a CARB compliant omnibus engine, then I'm able to sell legacy engines in the state. I'm subject to certain volume restrictions on those sales, and I'm subject to offsetting the excess emissions from those sales within the state. But I still can sell a federally certified engine, right? That would be a legacy engine. It's just a matter of volume. So if the question is, and I know this might be, coming up for some fleets, it may come up, in 25, maybe an engine manufacturer doesn't want to sell to your sector because, I don't know, for example, they don't feel they make enough profit on that particular sale. Maybe they make more for selling engines to a different sector, right? And so if there's volume constraints related to that, I think we're interested in hearing about those concerns and seeing the evidence around those claims about, not, if the claim is there's not going to be any volume for your particular sector, we want to see evidence supporting that claim, and we'll have those conversations during that rulemaking. So yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. But in terms of how this is going to affect your ability to provide service, again, I think we're making an assumption that there will be engines available, either a compliant engine or legacy engine.
Yeah, and I think the key takeaway here too is that, with our proposed rulemaking, for 2024, things are just going to proceed as normal as they have been. As 2025 comes up, I think one of the things too is we will continue to talk with the engine manufacturers and others, affected by this to sort of assess, what does 2025 look like? And we'll be continuing to work with California and other states too about sort of the impacts and availability of these engines, because we have heard sort of the challenges that I think many of the fleets are facing right now.
Great. A comment here and then followed by a question. Someone, again, trying to help respond in real time. I think the fleet question is coming from an advanced clean fleet rule misunderstanding. Then the question, is it fair to state that for all intended purposes, Oregon will be an EPA state for 2024?
Yes, I think that's a fair characterization.
Okay. And they follow on by saying there are a number of documents shown throughout the year that call out EPA or CARB state.
Well, let me just be clear on that, because we did talk about several different rules here. So, and for model year 2025, we have an advanced clean trucks rule, and that could include vehicles being sold in 2024. So I think as we're talking about the omnibus rules, it is fair to state that for all intended purposes, Oregon will be an EPA state for those conventionally fueled vehicles that are sold in the state. But the advanced clean trucks rule, there's going to be some requirements for model year 25, and that would happen, we expect, in 2024, because model year 25 is typically launches in 24.
Okay, just going to acknowledge the comment that I gave voice to earlier, expressing concern about implementing ACT until Oregon is ready with more infrastructure and incentives, and ACF. Next question, is Oregon ultimately striving for zero emissions options, or are they considering hybrid solutions?
I mean, I think there are certainly, our goals are a zero emissions future, and you can see that as part of the governor's previous governor signing on to different documents indicating that as a vision. So yes, we are looking at a zero emission future for medium and heavy duty trucks in Oregon. That is certainly the goal. But to get there, I think there are a lot of different solutions, hybrid solutions included. And Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, there's near zero emission vehicle sort of hybrid options under the advanced clean truck rule. And so yes, those are being considered and are part of the solution. It's not a one size fits all, and I don't think we've ever looked at this as a one size fits all solution, but certainly zero emissions is what we're striving for.
Yeah, I think we've indicated too, just looking at the greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. I mean, it's a significant contributor. It's up to 35%. And so in order for us to meet our statewide greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, we need to move towards a zero emission future. And that's, across all sectors of vehicles. But I think too, as Eric mentioned, under the ACT, to help the manufacturers move towards zero emissions, they're able to earn compliance credit for near zero emission vehicle technology as the technology sort of matures and grows overall.
Great. This next comment appears to be a comment, not a question. Under advanced clean fleet rules, state and local government fleets, including city, county, and special districts, and state agency fleets are required to ensure 50% of vehicle purchases are zero emissions beginning in 2024, and 100% of vehicle purchases are zero emissions by 2027. Oregon state municipalities should lead the way for ZEV adoption. So that's just, doesn't seem to have a question in it. I'll keep going. As a solid waste franchisee on the rural Oregon coast, how are you going to address the infrastructure issues in order to operate these trucks?
And thank you for that question. I mean, I think we did describe some grant funding that we put out there. We know that's just a drop in the bucket. We are looking for, actively seeking, more funding to increase infrastructure projects, and and there's a lot of federal money that's coming down the pipeline, and we intend on seeking out those opportunities to increase the amount of incentives and grant funding available. We recognize the large infrastructure cost that's required. We are looking at both publicly available types of projects, but also supporting private infrastructure projects as well for individual fleets. And so yeah, we're actively seeking more funding for those opportunities. But again, we put out 13.3 million earlier this spring, and those federal opportunities we're looking at those opportunities to help us bring more money into an already operational program. For example, that Oregon Zero Emission infrastructure program. We've got that program stood up, and so if there's an opportunity for us to pull in grant funding and for shovel ready projects. That's what we're looking at, here in the next year or so.
Yeah, and Eric, I just want to note too that, the Oregon is leaning in towards ensuring that we have, infrastructure developed. I want to highlight sort of efforts that our partner agency, Oregon Department of Energy, is doing too. They've been applying for the charging fueling infrastructure grants through the IRA to sort of build out medium and heavy duty charging corridor, along the I-5 corridor, as well as I-84. They've got roughly I think it was 50 or 60 million to build out, NEVI for infrastructure, NEVI funds to build out infrastructure along alternative fuel corridors. And while most of it is geared towards light duty charging, they are sort of future proofing it to ensure that there will be ability for medium and heavy duty charging as well. So, sort of things that we're looking at to sort of ensure that there is adequate charging, all over the state.
Great. Still getting questions coming into the chat, so I'll keep reading through. Not quite sure I understand this one. Will compressed natural gas engines require any change in regulation?
Well, the omnibus rules do regulate natural gas engine emissions. Currently there are natural gas compliant, omnibus compliant engines, CARB compliant engines. So yes, the rules do regulate natural gas engines, but typically those engines are a little lower emitting. There aren't, there are not all that many products on the market related to these natural gas engines. I mean, there are a handful, but I know that that's one of the ways that engine manufacturers are trying to comply with these lower NOx standards is the use of natural gas engines. In California, they do sell quite a few natural gas engines. Oregon doesn't sell as many, or certainly we don't register as many. I can't remember the numbers, but they're below 100 per year. It's a pretty small number. But yes, the natural gas engines are regulated under the omnibus rules and would require a change. But again, that's a manufacturer change. And so we can talk more about that. I don't have a whole lot of detail to respond to your question now, but if you've got some additional follow-ups, I'm happy to have some offline conversations about that.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Very helpful. Just to say that Rachel here at DEQ posted a link to the rule making webpage up here. So just acknowledge that. Next question. The engine manufacturers now have a fee/fine to pay for supplying a non-compliant engine into California and Oregon in 2024. Now that Oregon has delayed the implementation until 2025, will the fee/fine be required in Oregon?
Sure, that's a good question. This fee fine, I don't. That's something that a business is deciding for themselves. A company is deciding to charge this additional fee. That is not required under our rules. So I can't speak to whether an engine manufacturer or a supplier, vehicle supplier, would continue to charge any sort of fees or fines. That's nothing. That's not really our purview. But I would anticipate that they would probably drop something like that. I think it would make fairly good business sense. But again, I can't speak to what they would do. It's not really our place to get into that. So yeah, those additional charges were likely included. Well, I don't want to speak anymore on that. I think I'll just leave it where I did.
The DEQ's rules are silent on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Where will these presentation slides be posted, and when will they be made available? And the recording, please.
Sure. I couldn't tell you the exact date on that. It's probably going to be a week or so till we can get those posted to our website. We'll send out a link to the materials to the same diesel, biodiesel list on our website, so folks can have that. I mean, obviously this is a pretty well attended meeting, so there's a lot of folks that are interested. So we'll send out the links to those materials probably about a week or so.
Yeah, I think we can aim to get it online in about a week. And also just for folks, there is also an FAQ on that website. It's a little buried in there, but and it does cover a lot of what this has, and we'll probably need to update it as well, just to reflect sort of the fact that we are planning to postpone implementation until 2025.
Someone's bringing some real world challenges to this conversation. Delivery times for a school bus are currently between 12 and 24 months. It is likely that if I ordered a school bus today, I would not take delivery on it before January 1st, 2025. To complicate things further, only one of the 3 OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, currently offer a propane engine. How are school districts supposed to meet the rule and continue to service our students with the current delivery timelines?
Yeah, I understand. I understand your situation, and I don't think that DEQ's rules, or I should say the rules adopted by the Environmental Quality Commission, are responsible for these increasingly long delivery timelines. We are aware of them. I mean, we as I mentioned, or what you see on the slide here, there's a lot of grant programs that we administer, and we have seen continuous delays for truck and bus deliveries. So we are aware of those problems. But I can't speak to how your district is supposed to meet or serve your students with the delivery timelines. I mean, our interest is reducing emissions from medium duty trucks, school buses. I mean, there's quite a amount of good evidence out there about when you improve the emissions from school buses, how much better attendance is at schools, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of really good information in there, and that air quality improvement is what we are seeking. Again, I'll go back to what we said earlier. If there are continued concerns related to an individual sector, that there's expectations that there will be no engines available to meet the requirements in 25. Let's have those conversations in the permanent rulemaking, because again, I think we'll be looking for evidence that there will be no product available, and we'll be in conversation with engine manufacturers as well to see what their plans would be for 2025. So, but we recognize that in 2025, those legacy engine sales volume percentages go down. So instead of 45%, current rules I'm talking about, instead of 45%, there would only be 25% legacy engine sales allowed. We recognize that that might still be a problem. And again, we'll have that conversation as part of the permanent rulemaking.
And just as a corollary to that, Eric, too, I think, one of the things that California is looking at in their proposed revisions is to modify those percentage requirements, for 2025 and beyond. So those percentages may increase. So that might make more legacy engines available for sale in Oregon. So I don't want people to walk away feeling like there aren't options that we're looking at.
Thank you, Rachel. Good point.
Okay, this next question might be a little bit outside of our purview. How many jobs will the state of Oregon lose when many fleets just buy equipment in states that do not have the restrictions? You can license a truck in any state as long as you have an office. Will Oregon lose revenue too?
As part of our rulemaking, we have to do a financial assessment, and we did provide that. Rachel provided the link to the rulemaking, so I would take a look at our assessment there. I think, again, the intention of these of the delay here is to provide some time for both CARB to finalize their rules, and for a couple of important questions to be sorted out, including getting some more detail around the offset projects and making sure that engine manufacturers know what they need to do to comply with those excess emissions from legacy engine sales. And those legacy engine provisions were about providing a smooth transition. and we are actively engaged in trying to create that smooth transition. So no one here has an interest in just cutting off and stopping supply. So I think that question is sort of implying that that's our intention, and that's not our intention. Our intention is to create a smooth transition to a both zero emission vehicle future and a cleaner conventionally fueled vehicle future for medium and heavy duty trucks.
Great. Next question. Is this meant to only stop the sale of non-conforming vehicles, or is it also stopping the operation of the non-conforming vehicle? We've touched on this a couple times. But...
Yeah, for older vehicles, this is not, this is not applicable. This is for the sale of new vehicles. And Garrett again posted the link to some rules for the Portland metro area related to older vehicles, 96 and older right now. And there are some additional provisions in the Portland Tri-County area to phase out older diesel engines into the future. But these rules we're talking about today are meant to, I would frame it a little differently, are meant to take advantage of the technological advancements that are being made through California's rules and align ourselves with Washington and other states that adopt California's rules to have the cleanest possible vehicles running on our streets and highways to reduce the impact of air quality or of emissions from those vehicles on people's health. And so that is sorry, I lost the question here. That's the point, and it's not meant to stop the sale of any particular vehicle group or class. It's about taking advantage of the technology that's advancing to improve tailpipe emissions from diesel and other conventionally fueled vehicles. But the operation of vehicles that you own is not affected by these omnibus rules. These are for new vehicles, and any operational restrictions that you might be hearing about, Garrett linked that set of rules in the chat earlier. So take a look at those if you're concerned that your 1996 and older vehicles are affected by that.
Yep. All right. So this next thing I'm going to read looks like a comment. Can you appreciate how difficult it is to run a business with all the uncertainties we are faced with? So I think we're having that conversation now. I appreciate the comment. Someone pointing out that they are a small solid waste collector, but not asking a question there. And someone chiming in asking to clarify, trucks from the 90s and older will no longer be allowed to operate in Oregon after 2025, correct? And I think that is incorrect, and we're talking about it at length. But Eric, if you wanted to share any more.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I don't see it, and I kind of missed it. So
of course, to clarify, trucks from the 90s and older will no longer be allowed to operate in Oregon after 2025, correct?
That's not correct under these rules. And please let's talk if you're still unclear about that. But these rules are about new vehicles for sale in Oregon. They apply to engine manufacturers and not to fleets who own older vehicles. That's not what these rules apply to. If you have some questions about the rules that we referred to about 1996 and older trucks in the Portland metro counties, let's talk about that so that I can help clarify for you. I don't want to sidetrack us on that. What we're talking about here are rules for new vehicles sold in Oregon and emission standards associated with those new vehicles.
And people keep asking the same question over and over, so it sort of speaks to either a fundamental misunderstanding or some misinformation out there on the subject. But I'll read the next question on the list. Eric, thanks for working through this with us. It is about 11:15, and we've got another 15 minutes here. Looks like someone following up from our previous conversation. If I order a school bus and I'm expected to get it in 2025 as a 2025, but it has an engine made in 2024, It sounds like I'll be okay with these changes.
Dave, that's correct. Yeah, that would be essentially just sell through, and that's fine.
Great. And someone chiming back in on the thread around the older model years, wanting to ask, they're wondering, I guess I was more wondering when things are going to extend to the state of Oregon, not just the 3 counties listed above that always come up. So that is sort of outside of our purview here, and not a part of our plans. But Eric, feel free to share more.
Yeah, if we would plan to do that, that would be part of a permanent rulemaking, and we would, do stakeholder, engagement, do solicit public comment, all those things. And on that kind of rule, you should anticipate lots of sort of pre-assessment meetings with folks. I mean, we would announce the intention and talk through it with people and hear concerns. But forgive me, let me step back a second. Those are actually like statutory changes that Oregon DEQ was not part of. So I want to be clear about that. And I think that change we would likely need to see at the legislature level, and not through rulemaking. So forgive me, I misspoke a second ago when I said that. I expect that if the change that you're talking about from the Tri-County Portland area, expanding that out to the whole state, that would have to come, I expect, from the legislature. And that wouldn't be a rulemaking that we would do. So, but we have no certainty around if that would happen, or when. So, I think just make sure you're tracking any kind of announcements on that end, and engaging in the public process if you've got some serious concerns there. But I think, that is not something that we would undertake in our rulemaking process. It would be a legislative change.
Thanks for that. Okay, a couple questions in succession here, but I'll pause in between each. Who will enforce this rule, and what is the mechanism for doing so?
So enforcement of the omnibus rules are really through the engine manufacturers. So they're reporting to us on their sale of engines into the state of Oregon. And whether those are compliant engines, whether those are legacy engines, or they will be reporting to us, right? Or whether those would be exempt engines. They would be reporting all that information to us. And again, the rules apply to those engine manufacturers. So Oregon DEQ is enforcing those rules, and we're enforcing those at the manufacturer level. We're not enforcing those at the fleet level. So we're not out there, policing what engine you have in your vehicle. Obviously, you have to meet the Oregon Vehicle Code, and you have all the rules that apply to your vehicle through that code. But the sort of the mechanism for enforcement is through engine manufacturer reporting to DEQ and our assessment of those reports.
Okay, thank you. So from the same person, do you have any engine makers who have met the new 2025 omnibus rule as of today?
Any engine manufacturer that have met the rule as of today. I'm assuming when you say that, you mean, do they have compliant engines? There are some CARB compliant engines as of today, yes. At least one that I'm aware of, natural gas, there's a compliant natural gas engine. We know there's going to be product delivered in 24. I can't really speak to the details on that, but we anticipate there being compliant engines available for sale in 24 from at least some manufacturers. So, but as of today, I am unaware of there being a compliant diesel engine with the CARB 2024 rules. But typically, when you have the situation that we have here with this transition, I expect that there's a little bit of holding cards close to the chest from manufacturers. And so we may not know all that is actually going on and happening and all that is planned. And certainly, but we do certainly expect to see at least some compliant diesels out there in 2024. And I think that's another important reason for our delay, is to sort of see how that plays out. Those engines that are delivered in 24 that are CARB compliant, we'll be able to see how things are going and what what product is going to be made available. We'll probably have way more certainty around that, by the time we get to our May Environmental Quality Commission meeting.
All right, Eric, I'm going to share between you and me. I think we're getting close to the lightning round of this conversation. So if you can keep your answers brief, we might be able to touch the next 16, 17 messages we're getting here in the last 10 minutes of the meeting. But it looks as though we've got more incoming than we might have time to address. So let's shorten it up if we can. Eric, are you saying that the advanced clean truck rules are on vehicle model year and not engine model?
Yes,
That's
it's
correct.
on the vehicle model year, not the engine model.
Since compressed natural gas engines already exceed CARB standards, will fleets with a certain percentage of CNG trucks be exempt?
Again, this is a manufacturer rule, not a fleet rule. So I just think that question is not really relevant here. But your point about CNG engines already exceeding CARB standards, again, I believe there's a CARB compliant natural gas engine right now, omnibus compliant engine. And it might mean that all natural gas engines are not necessarily compliant. That's fair. But fleets with a certain percentage of CNG trucks be exempt? No, we're not exempting fleets in any way. This is a manufacturer rule and not a fleet rule.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point, that the fleet is not regulated here. It's the manufacturer. Okay.
And I think that's related to the next question too, just about the purchasing. There's a question about rural areas being accountable to the same restriction about purchasing the more expensive ZEVs. Purchasing requirements, it's just a manufacturer requirement.
That's right. Yeah, and someone else making the comment that please reiterate the point about these rules not applying to fleets. So that I think we're covering pretty well. Next question, how are medium duty and heavy duty zero emission vehicle sales being tracked to ensure that the original equipment manufacturers are meeting the advanced clean trucks mandate?
And I can answer this one really quick. Basically, manufacturers will have to submit sort of their sales to Oregon, so then we can track and monitor compliance. So that is something that they've set up a database for them to input that information and then allow them to understand how many credits and debits they might have and if they're meeting their compliance obligation.
I think we've touched on this. Would these rules only apply to new trucks sold after 2025, meaning the used truck market would be expected to be quite robust?
I don't know that we have any expectations for the used truck market, but to the first question, yes, they would only apply to conventionally fueled vehicles sold in 2025 and later.
Great. Okay, so someone's chiming in here to say, I disagree with the statement that engine manufacturers are making the decision to add the state-regulated fines. Engine companies are being fined, pay to pollute, to sell the vehicles. These costs are being passed on. It is not an original equipment manufacturer decision. It is a cost being levied by the state. I think we can just let that comment stand and keep moving. Stating the obvious, who believes that there will be no shortages of vehicles? Nobody in the original equipment manufacturer or fleet side of things believe that. This sounds like field of dreams. If we pass the legislation, the OEMs will come. Probably just let that stand as well. California has not addressed in any way the issue of zero emission vehicles not being safe for fuel delivery trucks. Has DEQ thought about this issue?
Yeah, I mean, there are applications that may not be suitable or don't as easily lend themselves to zero emission applications. And I think that's the what you see reflected in the rule. It's not about any individual sector. It's about percentages within certain classes of vehicles. So I mean, I haven't thought about this particular issue, but I understand the concern as it relates to other types of applications that could be challenging for zero emission vehicles. But I think that's built in to the advanced clean truck rule.
Yep. Yeah, they follow along saying terminal facilities where fuel is loaded for distribution will not allow electric vehicles to operate on the property. Someone also asking, apologies if this was already covered, when and where the recording of this meeting be posted. Thank you. I think, Rachel, maybe you could share that link again.
we'll send out a link to the list again with all the materials, just so that, because there's a lot of folks on the call. So we'll just make sure that link is sent out to the same address where we sent the announcement for this meeting. And if you're not aware of that, go to Oregon DEQ Gov Delivery, and you can sign up for air quality, diesel, and biodiesel email updates.
Okay. I want to give this question, comment, voice, but I'm not quite sure I understand it. I was under the impression that engines that are engine model year 2023 or earlier that do not meet the CARB omnibus regulations would only be able to be registered in the state of Oregon if said vehicle has less than 800,000 miles on it or 8 years old, whichever comes first. Is that in fact a part of this ruling, or am I mixing this up with another rulemaking or program?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where that's coming from. That's not accurate. If you're talking about legacy engines, there's no like mileage restriction or number of years restriction. It's really more about restricting the volume of legacy engines sold into the state compared to the total. So if an engine manufacturer, well, I'm not going to go into the example because we have limited time, but that's not what the rule is about. It's not talking about mileage or years. It's just about model year, whether an engine is compliant with the CARB standards or whether it's a legacy engine.
Great, thank you for that. New issue in this one I think we're familiar with. I acknowledge that these rules don't address vehicle phase out. However, there is a statute requiring that pre-2007 school buses are off the road by January 1st of 2025. This means these rules are putting a squeeze on school buses, which does need to be factored into the eventual final rule decision this spring. I think that's a very salient comment. I'm not sure if there's anything more to say there. Okay. How will the implementation delay affect the 177 state credit program?
I'm not sure if this is in reference to like the ACT credits that need to be generated, or I think even with the low NOx omnibus, manufacturers can earn credits. I can speak to the ACT. I can just say, manufacturers are allowed to earn early compliance credits, and those can be banked for use for when the ACT requirements kick in with the 2025 model year.
And I'll just add for the NOx, we're actively working with California to create a streamlined NOx credit reporting system for the Section 177 states. Our delay till 25 means that we'll be in line with Massachusetts, who's another state that's opted into these rules for 25. And that it would just benefit, I think, manufacturers to have a sort of a streamlined credit process or credit reporting process. And we're working with California on how we can do that.
Okay, I'm going to speed through this next comment because it addresses something we've just discussed, which is that ZEVs can't currently be used for fuel delivery trucks. Have we thought about this? And if this remains the case, will fuel distribution be exempted? So thank you for that comment. I don't think we have an answer on it today. Looking out to 2025, as part of the omnibus rules, there is a requirement for ZEV sales of 7 to 10% of total sales for a truck manufacturer. How can we expect to have an original equipment manufacturer to have those sales when the anticipated sale price of a zero-emission vehicle is 200 to 300% of a currently diesel-fueled unit, especially when there isn't much of a financial incentive for the customer to purchase such units?
Yeah, and I think this is something that, OEMs are probably trying to figure out how they are going to meet their sales targets. I also want to note that within ACT, there are some compliance flexibilities. So they might want to over-comply and say certain class vehicle, like maybe the delivery trucks, because you've got a number of the larger entities like Amazon and UPS who have committed to moving towards a ZEV fleet. And so they are purchasing these types of trucks. And so, they might be able to comply in that category to ensure that they can meet the targets. So I think there's a number of options there for manufacturers. And I know that California is also looking at potential revisions to the ACT rules to sort of ensure that the market can continue.
Great. got a comment in here, folks asking where they can get the slides for the webinar. We will send those out as we discussed. And in the final 2 minutes of the meeting, I think we're going to run out of time, but you said this is about environmental and emissions benefit. Has the full life cycle analysis on these new technologies been completed? Have you also compared the positive benefits against the true negative impacts? For example, significant financial costs borne through all the impacted industries and the direct impact these much higher costs will have on our at-risk communities, as many of their goods and services, costs will increase to compensate for the rules. So I guess you sort of spoke to the fiscal impact statement previously, Eric, and I think I might point this person there.
Yeah, I'll see if I can locate, or maybe Rachel, you can locate that link and pop it in the chat again. I think that, take a look at that that report that has all of our assessment of the financial impacts, but appreciate the comment.
Someone chiming in here. So when I call to order a truck and the OEM says they can't sell me one, that's the OEM holding their cards close to their chest. So sounds like something we've already talked about a little bit. Trying to do due diligence to get to the bottom of the list here. To be very clear, model year 2025 trucks are generally starting to build in January 1 of 2024. According to you, we will need to implement the advanced clean truck requirements in 3 months. Am I correct?
And maybe Rachel, I think you can clarify. What I meant to say is that typically the model year starts sometime, if we're talking about model year, it starts sometime in the prior year. So we're likely to see model year 2025 trucks in 2024. And so that, and obviously you see 2025 model year sold in 25 as well, right? So it's the ACT rules are about the companies have to report out their volume of sales and the percentages that they've been able to sell for zero emission vehicles. So I wasn't suggesting that there's something different that manufacturers have to do in 24, but for model year 25, and hopefully that's as clear as it can be, that there are requirements of sales requirements under the advanced clean truck rules. Now we know there is going to be CARB is planning on revisiting the ACT to some degree with some maybe additional flexibilities we anticipate. And we would make sure, and I mentioned earlier, to be in compliance or identical with those, and we would plan on adopting whatever additional flexibilities those are. But in 25, model year 25, ACT goes into effect, and that would include, I expect, vehicles delivered for sale this next year.
Okay, and I think I'm going to leave us with this one last comment because we are 1 minute over the hour. Want to respect everyone's time. Someone chiming in here to say it could be good to clarify the difference between certification model year and marketing model year, not necessarily the same. So with that, I'll leave it to you, Eric.
All right, thank you very much. Rachel did include the link there to our clean trucks rule, so take a look at that for the financial impacts statement. Thank you very much, folks, for being with us today. A lot of questions. Obviously, we'll get all of the materials or all our recording and the slide deck out on a link to the list, the diesel and biodiesel list. We thank you for attending. We hope this was useful for you, and we appreciate your engagement and looking forward to talking to you in the future. Thank you.